Who, what, where, when, why, how. Some recent studies suggest that kids can ask upwards of 140 questions a day. That's an average of about one question every 5 minutes. So if you are an average kid, you've already had practice asking thousands of questions in your lifetime, which means you should be off to a great start for this week's reading strategy: questioning. What is questioning? The reading strategy questioning is probably exactly what you think it is. Questioning means to stop and ask myself questions about the text and the author's intentions. When it comes to reading, the questions we ask fall into two different categories: questions that monitor our comprehension and questions that extend our thinking. Questions that monitor our comprehension help us figure out whether or not we understand what we're reading. These are the easiest type of questions to ask and often have just one right answer, such as, "What grade is this character in?" or "How did the law change?" When we ask questions like this, the answer can tell us what we need to do next. Sometimes, if we take a second to recall information we've already read, we can answer the question and continue reading. This is called clarifying information. Other times, especially if the answer is important to understanding what we're reading, we may need to go back and reread an earlier section to get the information. And occasionally, we may realize the text hasn't answered our question yet, so this can help give us a reason to keep reading. Questions that extend our thinking help us gain a deeper understanding of what we're reading. These questions are a little more difficult because they're usually open-ended, meaning there will be more than one right answer, such as, "Why is this character so mean to everyone?" or "Is the new law fair?" Someone else reading the same text could have a completely different answer from yours. This type of question gets us thinking about different possibilities and can help us see a wider picture of what we're reading about. Questions that extend our thinking show us that we not only understand what we're reading, but that we're ready to form our own interpretation of the text. Why is questioning important? Good readers use both types of questions to interact with the text. Just like your teachers ask questions to make sure you understand and help you learn more, you can help improve your reading skills by asking yourself questions when you read. Asking questions that both monitor comprehension and extend thinking can show us what we understand, how we feel, what our opinion is, and what we're confused about. So where a teacher uses questions to make us think in class, asking ourselves questions when we read helps us think about what we're reading. And if we're thinking about what we're reading, we're going to remember it better. For this reason, questions play a very important role in understanding who we are as readers. If you find that you're asking a lot of questions that you cannot answer, it might indicate that you need more support for the text. This would be a good time to ask someone, like a teacher, for help. Or it could also mean that the text might be too challenging at this time. This is especially true if you cannot answer many of the questions that monitor your comprehension. Remember, those are basic questions that ask what is happening in a text. If you're reading an independent novel and can't answer questions that monitor comprehension, you should consider abandoning the book. It could be that the reading or vocabulary level is too high, or that you're just not interested in that type of book right now. How can we ask quality questions? If you've ever been around a toddler or a young child, you probably know that you've had practice asking questions practically since you started talking. However, that inquisitiveness or natural curiosity seems to fade as we get older, so you might need to help your brain form the habit of asking questions when you read. You should ask questions for both fiction texts, like novels and short stories, and for nonfiction texts, like textbooks or news articles. To keep it simple, you should ask questions every time you read. If you need help, think about using the 5 W's and H as sentence starters. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Here are just a few examples of questions you might ask. For a fiction text, like a novel or short story, you could ask, who is this character again? Where does this chapter take place? What happened to the character the last time? Why did the characters act or react the way they did? How do I feel about this? What would I do in this situation? Why did the author choose to have that happen? For a nonfiction text, like a textbook or news article, you could ask, who is involved? When or where did this take place? What do I understand the best? What am I confused about? Why did or why does this happen? How did or how does this happen? What is the author's purpose here? The challenging part of this strategy is that asking the question is only half the job. Just like when you learn to make quality predictions, you also learn that you need to revisit those predictions to see whether you were right or wrong. Now, when you ask a question, you have to search your brain for an answer to figure out what to do next. If you're able to answer the questions, you might just keep reading. In other cases, you might need to go back and reread a section. You could also make a prediction or preview the next section to see if your question will be answered. Or, you might have to ask a teacher or a classmate to explain something you didn't understand, especially if you're doing a reading for class. It could even provide you with an idea of something you might look into or research about further. What are some examples? Now that we have a good idea of what questioning is, why it's important, and how to use it, let's take a look at some examples. For your music class, your teacher asks you to read an article titled, Music That Tells a Story. After reading the title, you might ask yourself a monitoring question. Does this mean just the sounds made by the instruments, or does this mean the lyrics that are sung? And an extending question. How could music tell a story without lyrics? Because you haven't even started the reading yet, you know it's okay to move on. Pay attention to see if your questions are answered. Throughout history, different groups of people have created music for different purposes. From passing down history from one generation to the next, to signaling military tactics to troops on the front line, to just purely made for entertainment, music has many different applications, including storytelling. While lyrics can certainly help relay the story to the listener, composers of earlier forms of music, like symphonies and ballets, aim to tell a story through different variations of aspects like tone, pace, and pitch. At this point, we know that we have answers to both of our earlier questions. The author of the article uses the word music for both songs with lyrics as well as songs that are only instrumental. The article also explained that some composers tell a story through music by making changes to the tone, pace, and pitch of the song. We might also ask some new questions after reading this section, such as, how did the military use music to signal its troops? Or, I know what a ballet is. What is a symphony? Or, what kind of stories would composers tell through a symphony or ballet? Asking questions like this help us interact and think about what we're reading. Let's try again. You are reading the opening to Marjane Satrapi's memoir and graphic novel, Persepolis. As you read, think about what questions you have. Satrapi writes, in 1979, a revolution took place. It was later called the Islamic Revolution. Then came 1980, the year it became obligatory to wear the veil at school. We didn't really like to wear the veil, especially since we didn't understand why we had to. And also because the year before, in 1979, we were in a French non-religious school, where boys and girls were together. And then suddenly in 1980, all bilingual schools must be closed down. We found ourselves veiled and separated from our friends. What questions do you have to monitor comprehension? Remember, these are basic comprehension questions about what is happening, and these questions usually have one right answer. Perhaps you might ask, Where does the story take place? Or, is the narrator Muslim? Or, how old was the narrator when this happened? As you read further, you would discover the story takes place in Iran, that the narrator is Muslim, and that she was about 10 when this happened. Notice that all of these questions have just one right answer, and that is why they are questions that monitor our comprehension. Now, what kind of questions can you ask that extend your thinking about this text? Remember, this time you're trying to think of questions that could have more than one right answer, or that readers may answer differently. It's very likely that your questions may be different, but here are just a few examples of questions that would extend our thinking. You could ask, how did such a big change happen in just 1 year? Or, why does the author start her memoir by explaining the first time she was forced to wear a veil? Or, how would I feel if boys and girls suddenly couldn't go to school together anymore? Asking questions like this show that we not only understood what we read, but that we made an attempt to think more deeply about what we read. Notice that all of these questions would be answered differently by different readers, and that is why they extend our thinking about the text. Recap. Questioning means to stop and ask questions about the text and the author's intentions, and answering those questions are just as important as asking them. Questions fall into two main categories when we're reading. Some questions ask about basic information to monitor our comprehension. These questions usually have one right answer and can help tell us that we're understanding what we're reading. Other questions extend our thinking by making us think more deeply about a text. These questions often have more than one right answer, or would be answered differently by different readers. Either way, we should ask questions and think about the answers to those questions every time we read. That wraps up our flipped lesson on questioning. If you have any questions about this strategy, feel free to watch all or part of the video again, or ask your teacher when you return to class. Click the link in the description box below to access a Google form for this lesson.